A Valline Grand Mall, glittering heart of the city. A place so vast, so polished, so perfectly lit, that stepping inside often made people feel impossibly small. But today that elegance was shattered by a strange, dissonant sound. Soft, scattered whispers rising from the marble atrium. At the center of the commotion sat a little girl, no older than 6. Porcelain skin, platinum blonde pigtails, knees folded to her chest as she sat on the cold stone floor. Small hands clamped over her ears. Her shoulders trembled. Her lips moved, stammering broken syllables like a skipping record, and her eyes, clear, pale blue, welled with tears, as if one more footstep toward her would make something inside her snap. The panic of an autistic child isn't loud. It isn't violent, but it lands like a fire alarm in a place with no exits. Shoppers stared from a distance. Some leaned closer, then recoiled. A young store clerk whispered nervously, "Is that her?" "Yeah, Harrington's daughter. The one with severe autism. He spent millions on treatments, but still, don't get close. She doesn't let anyone touch her. It's dangerous." A security guard in a black vest hovered by a stone pillar, hand on his radio, waiting on management. No one moved. The panic attack at the center of the Grand Mall collapsed inward, shrinking into a tiny, shaking figure like a planet folding in on itself. And then, a step. Not heels, not leather Oxfords, but the soft scuff of worn rubber soles. Clarice Mayfield, afternoon janitor, around 40, black, short-statured, spine curved slightly by years of work, stepped out from the corridor. Her faded blue uniform clung to her frame. In one hand, a damp mop. In the other, nothing but time. No one had noticed her for years. In a world always looking up, women like her, black, bent, cleaning, became part of the background. Expected, unseen, forgettable. But this time she was the first to walk forward. "What is she doing?" A woman gasped. "Is that filthy black janitor crazy?"
Wait a second. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps us.
A sales clerk muttered. The security guard flinched, ready to intervene, but Clarice had already knelt beside the girl. Not a word, not a touch, just stillness. From her side pouch, she pulled out something odd. Small, plastic, ridiculous in its simplicity. A bubble wand. The murmurs grew, rippling outward. "What the hell is that? Is she serious? She thinks bubbles will fix this. She'll make it worse." Clarice heard them. Or maybe she'd just learned to live beyond their voices. She dipped the wand into solution, raised it, and blew softly. A bubble rose, then another, and another. They floated over the girl's tangled hair, through the stiff air of the designer-filled atrium, like something misplaced from another world. Emily, still curled tight, still whispering, didn't move, but her shoulders slowed. The trembling faded. One bubble drifted down, brushed her nose. She blinked, fingers loosened. Hands dropped to her lap. Another bubble floated by. She reached for it, slow, shaky. The fear in her eyes shifted into wonder, curiosity. Something small, but real. The entire mall held its breath. Emily Harrington, the daughter of a billionaire, a girl untouched by any therapist for months, began chasing the bubbles, her tiny hands reaching, her mouth parted, and then a smile, not forced, not coaxed, just real. On the third-floor lounge behind glass too clean to see, a man stood frozen. Alexander Harrington, age 46, biotech mogul, the mind behind Helix Tech's global success, owner of 100 clinics, watched the scene unfold with wide eyes. His suit was perfect, his posture rigid. A man who never faltered, never cracked, until now. His face held something even his private therapist had never seen: awe, and a grief so deep it curled behind his ribs. Emily, his daughter, the child he'd thrown science, money, specialists, now smiling because a janitor blew bubbles from a dollar store wand. Alexander said nothing, but his eyes stayed locked on the woman below, the woman he'd never seen before, The woman who, without words, without status, without permission, had quieted the storm inside his daughter, with nothing more than breath and a bubble. As Emily reached for the floating bubbles, Clarisse stayed still. The girl's reflection shimmered in eyes that had witnessed loneliness more times than anyone should. Clarisse knew this moment of connection was fragile. One too soon, one word too loud, and it would all vanish. So when Emily cautiously held out her hand toward the bubble wand, Clarisse leaned slightly, ready to place it gently in the girl's palm. It was just a toy, cheap plastic, the kind forgotten on store shelves. But maybe for Emily it was the first thing she'd ever asked to hold. And then, a voice, cold and sharp as breaking glass. "Are you out of your mind?" Heels clacked against the marble floor. A white woman in a tailored suit charged across the atrium, her name badge gleaming like a badge of authority, indignation burning in her eyes. "Who do you think you are, handing unapproved objects to Mr. Harrington's daughter?" Clarisse froze. Emily flinched. The light in her eyes collapsed like a balloon popped midair. Her hands flew to her dress, fingers twisting the fabric, panic creeping back into her limbs. Two security guards appeared. One stepped between Clarisse and the child. The other radioed in, voice clipped. "VIP breach, unauthorized contact with the Harrington girl." Clarisse said gently, "I was only trying to help." The woman, Ramona Klein, head of VIP guest relations, snatched the wand from Clarisse's hand and held it up like evidence of a felony. "This is unacceptable. You are not authorized to touch her." Clarisse looked at Emily, now trembling, her gaze distant and blank again. Her fingers tugged at her hem as if bracing for something painful. Clarisse spoke softly. "I was trying to calm her. I'm a licensed child psychologist. I have certification." Ramona laughed, loud, ridiculous. A black janitor, in a faded uniform, claiming to be a specialist. She hissed, voice loud enough for others to hear. "A psychologist? Please. People with real credentials don't mop floors." Scattered chuckles rippled among the crowd. A security guard gave Clarisse a pitying glance. A young shop assistant looked away, biting her lip. No one said a word in her defense. Clarisse lowered her gaze. No protest, no argument. She packed away the bubble wand, folded her cloth, and stood up slowly, shoulders slumped, spine bent, just as she had 1,000 times before. But this time, a little girl followed. Emily clung to her sleeve, whispering something too soft to hear. Alexander Harrington had seen it all. From behind the glass of the executive lounge on the 3rd floor, he had watched every second unfold. He stepped into his private elevator, descending in silence. When security moved to intercept, he waved them off. Minutes later, Clarisse was invited to a private room in the management wing. No one knew what was said inside. But the next morning, Clarisse Mayfield was officially hired as Emily Harrington's personal caregiver, at 10 times her previous salary. The gossip spread like wildfire. She blew some bubbles, and now she's nanny to a billionaire's kid. Talk about luck. These people always pretend to be kind, but we all know what they want. Bet she planned it, targeted the girl for attention. Clarisse heard it all. She said nothing. She didn't post contracts online, didn't walk through the front gates, didn't snap selfies in the Harrington mansion. She just showed up every day. Quiet, steady, because few knew the truth. Years ago, Clarisse wasn't a janitor. She was Dr. Clarisse Mayfield, a leading child psychology PhD, once part of the city's most prestigious pediatric center, Atria. The very place Alexander Harrington had personally funded to build a custom therapy team for his daughter. Emily had shown signs at 2 years old, averting eye contact, recoiling from sound, screaming when touched. Alexander panicked. No expense was spared. Atria assembled their finest. Clarisse was among them. She was the first to develop a method using visual motor feedback to calm children like Emily. Bubbles. Those simple, weightless things became tools of connection, not distraction. Her method helped a child, 2 years older than Emily, turn toward their parent for the first time. but no credit ever came. Her closest colleague, Dr. Alyssa Ward, a white woman from the same school, always trailing Clarice in patient trust, saw an opening. One day during a session, a child slipped and fell. Minor, harmless, but Alyssa reported it, exaggerating the incident. Excessive stimulation, causing temporary trauma. There was no real inquiry. The board, white, disinterested, dismissed Clarice within the week. Her license was suspended for crossing clinical boundaries. No hospital would hire her again. Alyssa kept the methods, rose in the ranks, became the new face of autism therapy. Clarice vanished. No lawsuit, no scandal, just silence. She took janitorial work, studied, retested, tried to survive, until fate brought her back to the one child she was always meant to help. Since Clarice entered the Harrington home, Emily changed. No more night terrors, no more shattered toys, no more flinching from brushes or hands. No therapy protocols, no rigid benchmarks, just mornings with paint, afternoons with bubbles, evenings by the window, saying nothing, just being. Emily didn't need diagnosis charts. She needed someone who stayed. And Alexander, at last, saw what he once overlooked. Clarice wasn't pretending. She wasn't lucky. She was the only one who saw Emily not as a problem to fix, but as a soul to reach. Over time, Emily began tying her own hair, always crooked, always colorful. She started waiting outside Clarice's door in the mornings, instead of curling up in the corner of her bed. And the first time in over 5 years, she turned when someone called her name. But most remarkable of all, she smiled. Not the reflexive kind therapists wrote down in reports. This was real. She smiled when Clarice showed her how to blow bubbles, when Clarice placed a hand gently on her forehead and whispered, "It's a beautiful day, you know that?" When they watered plants together, tiny white fingers gripping a rough, dark hand in quiet understanding. Alexander Harrington watched, not as the frantic father screaming into phones or the control-obsessed man behind endless treatment charts. He simply stood in doorways, and, little by little, I began to believe in something softer. But peace, as always, was short-lived. One Monday morning, as Emily colored beside Clarice, the door creaked open, quiet, cold, and a familiar shadow entered. Dr. Alyssa Ward, white coat as pristine, name badge gleaming, blonde hair in a tight ponytail, red lipstick just enough to be professional. She smiled, that kind of smile that wraps a blade in silk. "Well, look who we have here," she said, stepping in uninvited. Clarice gave a small nod. Alyssa knelt, pretending to smooth Emily's hair, but her eyes never touched the child. They locked onto Clarice like a dare. "You're still here?" "Longer than I expected." Clarice said nothing. Emily looked up at her and clutched her hand tight, as if to shield herself from the chill now creeping into the room. Alyssa stood, scrolled something on her phone. "Mr. Harrington has asked me to resume overseeing Emily's care. As you know, I'm still her lead specialist." Clarice stayed silent. She had no titles to wield, no credentials to throw around, but her eyes, those same eyes Alyssa once feared, held a quiet warning. "I see you." In the days that followed, the air inside the mansion changed. Alyssa started whispering things carefully crafted. She told Alexander that Clarice was overstepping, interfering with treatment routines, using unverified methods. "She's creating unhealthy emotional dependency," Alyssa said in a closed-door meeting. Alexander frowned. He didn't respond. But he didn't dismiss it either. Alyssa didn't stop. She told nurses, guards, staff that Clarice was playing a role, trying to be mommy, winning over the child, and maybe the father. No one said it out loud, but no one challenged it either. Because Alyssa Ward was the name in autism recovery, Clarice heard. Of course she did. But she said nothing, because Emily was still okay, and that was what mattered. Until one morning, Clarice was called upstairs. Emily hadn't come down for breakfast. She knocked. No answer. When she opened the door, She saw Emily curled on the carpet, clutching her stomach, face pale. "Emily!" She ran to her, called for the nurse, screamed, "She's seizing!" Alexander and the guards rushed in seconds later. Emily was moved to the medical room, where emergency treatment stabilized her after nearly 30 harrowing minutes. She lay limp, her eyes dull, lips still trembling. Alexander turned to Clarice. "What happened?" Before she could answer, Alyssa appeared. Right on cue. "Her." She pointed at Clarice. She gave Emily chocolate with peanut butter. "She's severely allergic." Clarice's face froze. "No, I would never. I check everything." "Then where did it come from?" Alyssa snapped, voice cutting like glass. "Who else had access?" All eyes turned. Alexander clenched his fists. A guard whispered, "We should check the security footage." Alexander nodded. "From last night through this morning." "Pull it up." The room fell silent. The screen lit up. A feed from the hidden ceiling camera in Emily's room, part of a private system only Alexander knew. 4. The door creaked open. A figure stepped in. Not Clarice. Alyssa Ward. She moved to the bedside, carrying a small gift bag. Kneeling, she stroked Emily's hair, then pulled out a chocolate. "Unwrap it," and forced it into the sleeping child's mouth. Emily instinctively resisted. Alyssa pushed harder. She whispered something, then walked out, closing the door quietly behind her. No one breathed. Clarice stood still, lips pressed tight. Alexander turned. His face wasn't red with rage. It was pale, icy. "You?" Alyssa's voice shook. I was conducting a threshold test. It was a protocol." "You poisoned my child," he said. Each word hit the floor like steel. The truth unraveled fast. Alyssa's reports, progress, fabricated. Every update had been carefully adjusted to convince Alexander his daughter was improving. Her contract? A vault of lies, siphoning tens of thousands from a fund meant for Emily's future. The scandal was undeniable. Years ago, Clarice had been set up by Alyssa, and no one had believed her because she had no power, no voice, no whiteness. Now they believed. Not because Clarice defended herself, but because Alyssa exposed herself through cruelty no one could ignore. Alexander turned. His eyes were glassy. "You were fired. Your name was destroyed, just for being better. And still, you came back. You stayed. Asked for nothing. Just to sit beside a child who wasn't even yours." Clarice didn't reply. Because sometimes, those who carry the deepest wounds are the ones who speak the least. The press conference was held 3 days later at the main hall of Atria Center, the very place once hailed as the gold standard for pediatric therapy. Both the media and medical community stood still as Alexander Harrington stepped onto the podium. He wore a charcoal suit, fatigue etched lines beneath his eyes. But his gaze was unwavering. "I want to say this myself publicly, to our profession and to anyone who ever believed in the wrong people." He paused, breathed. "Dr. Alyssa Ward has been terminated and formally charged for manipulating treatment results, endangering a patient and falsifying medical records for personal gain." The room rippled with whispers. "I've ordered a full review of every case she handled and launched an internal investigation into those responsible for forcing a black specialist, Miss Clarice Mayfield, out of this center years ago with no just cause." He tightened his grip on the microphone, looked straight into the camera. "I apologize, not just for what my daughter endured, but for letting myself be blinded by reputation, by clean but hollow reports, by bias I never questioned. I let someone walk away who could have changed the lives of countless children, because I didn't see that what she did was real." Backstage, Clarice stood in silence. A soft brown dress, hands gently clasped. No makeup, no prideful stare, just the light catching her eyes, sharpening them into something rare. As if all her life she had been waiting to hear just one word: sorry. The very next day, Clarice Mayfield was officially reinstated at Atria Center. Not as a forgiven footnote, but But as director of autism spectrum therapy, she now led the department, trained the same experts who had once outranked her. No one objected, because no one deserved it more. In her small office, walls cream-colored, window facing a quiet garden, Clarice placed a drawing by Emily. Colorful bubbles. A curly-haired woman holding hands with a little girl beneath a tree. No signature needed. You just knew. Emily was changing too. She was 7 now. She dressed herself in the morning, picked out her own shoes. She spoke. Just a few words, unsteady, scattered. But when she said Dad, Alexander's breath caught every time. One morning in the backyard, Emily ran up and hugged Clarice from behind, then whispered, "Miss Clarice?" Clarice nearly cried. It was the first time Emily had ever said a name. Alexander saw it from the porch. He didn't interrupt, just stood beneath the overhang, hands clenched quietly by his side. This could have happened sooner. Months passed. Clarice bought herself a small home in the suburbs. Red-tiled roof, whitewashed walls, a wooden fence and wild flowers out back. A quiet life she finally called her own. She still came to work every day, but no longer with a mop or bucket. She walked through Atria's front doors with a badge clipped to her chest. Title clear, degree visible, and people greeted her with respect, not fear but admiration. She avoided the spotlight, turned down interviews, declined book deals, refused keynote invitations from global conferences. When a young colleague asked her why, she only smiled. "I just want children to be allowed to live like children," messaged. Some miracles don't come from fame, degrees, or fortune, but from the quiet gentleness of a heart that simply cares. Clarice never had to prove anything, except the purity of her love for a child. The world once called a problem. She didn't fight for justice with anger, but with unshakable patience. And perhaps this story reminds us, sometimes it's not grand therapies or perfect plans that open a closed soul, but something as fragile, as fleeting, as a soap bubble.